Okay, let's get started with the actual class. Okay, so we're going to start off, we're going to follow this outline. We are going to talk about creating the CAD files, the blank CAD files, the seed files that you're going to need throughout the development of your project. And like I said in the intro, most are 2D, some are 3D, but some of the 2Ds also include a 3D within that 2D. So I would like to take a look at that. Before we actually create the files, let's just talk about what that means, what I just said, that you could have a 3D file within a 2D file, that sort of thing. So let's bring up the software, and I'm just going to show you what I mean. Look at the very top, and this is no different than Power Geopack or anything. It tells you at the very top whether you're in a 2D file or a 3D file, right? And so if you're in that 2D file and you bring some 3D element or you assign some 3D information to an element in 2D, what it's going to do is it's going to automatically create this where it says default 3D view. So what that means, it's creating these models, and you should be familiar. When I say models, you should be familiar with models from even Power Geopack. So I'm going to hit this modeling button here, and this dialog right here should look very familiar to you. For the most part in Power Geopack, we did not really use 3D files, unless you we're using something outside of Geopack, like some of the open roads technologies, but the vast majority of the people just using straight up MicroStation and Geopack would have really just been working with all 2D files. But when it is possible though to have a separate model within your design file that's a 3D or a 2D file. And so when I do something like, for instance, I bring in this terrain model, and we'll get into that later as far as how to create terrains or bring them in. When you reference in that file and you set that terrain as the active terrain, well, now you've got this 3D component, and then automatically that 3D model is going to be created. And when you right click with your mouse and you then hold down that right click, you'll see this view control. And then if I come over here and hit the second one, see it, that's a very common one that's going to be used. It's called your plan view and a 3D. So I'm going to release there. And then this is a concept that you'll need to get used to. Okay, so note that if around the edge of this view, in view 2, see how it says 3D? So I'm in the same design file, but I'm looking at the same time, and this is kind of maybe a new concept to you. You may have had models before, but you were just going in strictly in one model or the other model. But it's actually possible to be in two models at the same time. And the way that works is, notice over here in view 2, see how at the top it's dark? That means that is the active view. And so any tools that you use, anything that you do at this point, it's going to be really like you're actually sitting in that 3D model. Or I could come back over here, and if I click, and now notice that view 1 is dark. So like I said, I'm in both at the same time. And so anything I'm doing over here, well, actually, let me go back to that 3D model, and I'm going to go to rotate, and then for navigation purposes, some things you'll have to get used to is you're going to pull around this this guy here, this little T, X, whatever you want to call it, and it's often very handy when navigating in the 3D view to have your snap mode set to sometimes nearest works best, but you generally have this this toggle snap turned on, so that as you're moving around that that pointer T, whatever we want to call it, I can grab onto anything in that 3D view. And that's important because otherwise you'll lose yourself. The view will just fly off into space. So I grabbed onto something here. So now if I push down my left mouse button and I keep it held down, I can kind of move around and I can see that model that was created. And then I can just kind of navigate around. I'm looking at that. Now, of course, we're going to be starting off class with a blank file. I just, in order to kind of communicate what these 2D and 3D files mean, I wanted to show you one that was already kind of developed so you could kind of see the end result of the model. There you go. And of course, we can visualize cross sections against that anywhere. But if I wanted to, I could come up here and I could click on that 3D, and then of course it's going to take me straight into just working in only that 3D model. But for the most part with the ORD, this is kind of the normal mode of operation. You're sitting really in this 2D file, you're visualizing the 3D, you're not really drafting anything over there. All that, like I said, all that 3D work over there is coming about from doing something or using something called corridor modeling. And we're going to, of course, we'll get into this later in the class. And then what you'll find out is that we can just temporarily visualize cross sections. And that brings up really another type of a model. We can also visualize the profile. And so I'm going to show you what that means. This is, maybe kind of a new concept. So if I'm in the corridor tab up here, and I click on dynamic cross sections, open a cross section view, I can click on that corridor or the alignment, and then I can come up here and I can click on any available window. So I'll click on, say, number 4, for instance. And then I click inside that view, and it is going to visualize a cross section in any place that I want on the model. And that's what you're seeing over here in the 3D view. You can see exactly where I'm visualizing it. You can also see it down here in the 2D view, and then I can toggle through, and we'll get into the details of this later. In order for you to understand what I'm saying about the 2D files and 3D files, I just quickly wanted you to be able to see this. And I'll also show you the profile view, how it uses another type of model again. And that's this profile model. So I'm going to click Open Profile Model. I'll drop down here and I can select, you can actually select on any line, but in this case I'm going to select the alignment. Right there, I select, and then it, just like the dynamic cross sections, it says select a view. So I'll bring up some other view, I'll click in that view, and it's going to show me the profile of the alignment. And we can talk about annotating. We'll get into that later. Let's kind of stop there. And the way I want to finish off this first video, this first section on creating your 2D and 3D files, is let's talk about getting your project set up. You're getting started. If you're in our company, you're working off of the H drive. No different than Power JPEG, or if you're with IDOT, you're on the W drive that they use, or project-wise, many different. But in any case, the basic format is going to be similar. If you're doing work for IDOT, of course, you're going to be using the IDOT manual. And if you want to see what your file name should look like and how many 2D and 3D files you need and everything, I'm just going to search for file naming. That's going to take me down to the chapter, and that chapter in the IDOT manual anyway, chapter 2, I guess, is going to show you the folder structure that we should be using, so when we deliver to IDOT, that it matches. And it's also going to show us the file naming conventions that they want us to use. So when you get started on a project, it's nice in the very beginning to go ahead and just, if somebody already hasn't set up a template for you with all the files that you need, it's nice to think about what you're going to need and go ahead and get those files, those blank files out there. So if I look through all these possibilities here, I know that I'm going to need an alignment file, a topo file, a corridor file, a super elevation file, a design file, a right-of-way file, and an existing terrain file. Those are the types of files that I need when I first get started. And all those files, when I create them from that seed, I'm going to want to create them from a 2D seed with the one exception of the existing terrain model. That's going to be a 3D file. Okay, so let's go ahead and just create one of these files. I've already got the folder structure for us set up. And so for this class, I'm going to work off the C drive. I've got a student one, so wherever your files are located, wherever you placed your student 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, that's where you're going to point to, whether it's locally or on a server. Let's go to your student folder, and there's that CAD folder we're so used to seeing. And then what you're going to see here is the IDOT folder structure. So they've got, this is, the exact, it's typed in the exact way that they have it, so that, so our references work properly when and especially with ORD, we point to a lot of different reference files that you can't detach, and you don't really want to be renaming the file. So it's best if you just go ahead and use that IDOT file naming convention, whether it be for the files or for the folders. So most of these files that we are going to create when we get started here in the design folder, like I said, are going to be these files. These are all the 2D files that I just mentioned. But to see how we go about creating a new file from a seed, let's go ahead and go through that process. These have been created for us, but let's go ahead and create that 3D file that we need, that terrain file that I had mentioned. So here we go. So in the software, we're going to go File, New, and we're going to come back and talking about working sets and that sort of thing in a bit, but let's just get started for now. We're not really setting up our work sets yet. That's another new concept. But let's go ahead and just create that file. And like I said, we're going to go to the C drive, whatever drive you're in, Student, CAD, Design. And then this probably looks real familiar to you, no different than Power JPEG, but notice at the very bottom that by default your computer is probably going to be set to pointing to the IDOT environment, and in this case you want to make sure it's the ORD environment. You can tell that by the name IDOT underbar ORD configuration, that whole path. And then when I hit the browse button, I can see that there's two seed files. One that just says IDOT-ing for English, and then the IDOT-ing 3D. So it's really just those two files that we're mainly using for setting up files. We said we already have the 2D files set up already, so let's go ahead and set up that 3D file. So I'm going to browse and point to IDOT-ing 3D, and now I'm going to create the file. Of course, again, using the IDOT file naming convention, if you look at the CAD manual, they always start off with D for district, then the district number. This district is District 5, and then you've got the contract number, which is usually 5 alphanumeric digits, or either letters or numbers. Usually, oftentimes, it'll be like something like 72A 4, 5, something like that. For the training purposes, we're just going to name it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we are going to use the file naming convention even for the 3D. So let's bring up that CAD manual again and see how they go about naming it. Looks like terrain exists with the T capitalized, the E capitalized. So let's go ahead and type that in. Terrain exist. In that, we're not going to put the extension on it because I'm using a 3D seed. It's automatically going to put the extension for me anyway. So I'm going to hit the save button. And now notice here in a second, up at the top, it's creating just a straight 3D file. This is not like a 2D file with a 3D file in it. This is just a straight 3D file. And this is the file that we are going to import our terrain model. And we're going to get that, in this particular case, from the Power Geopack format, which is TIN, a triangulated irregular network file. Okay, so that should be it for this first section, this first video. I can go back, look to see what I've got, and you can see there's all those 2D files, and then the one 3D file is the terrain exist. And so now we are ready to get started. So that completes section 1 or chapter 1 or whatever we decide to call this.